Hi, my name is Mark Biernat. I'm a monetary economist. In this video, I want to talk about the economic impact of the geoeconomic situation going on in Russia, specifically in the Kursk Belgorod region. These two regions, these two oblasts have been in the news lately, and there is an economic impact. Let's talk about this economic impact. I'm going to talk about it from two perspectives. Perspective number one, a real perspective, equated with GDP, people's lives on a microeconomic level. Two, from a monetary perspective, what this means in terms of currency. And three, I'm going to sum it up for Russia, geopolitical events as a whole. So let's talk about the obvious. The first is the real. Now, if you look at Belgorod or Kursk, each one of those regions comprise 0.5% of the Russian GDP. So 0.5 plus 0.5, let's say what's 1%. That doesn't seem like a large economic impact. And you can argue that the impact is relatively small. But I'm going to take a counterclaim and say it has a relatively modest or reasonable impact. And you have to the thing you have to understand, the important point you have to understand about Russia, and I may go into depth with this in another video, is the GDP is concentrated, 25% of the GDP of Russia is concentrated in Moscow, 10% in St. Petersburg, and 10% in Tyumen, which is in Eurasian province, oblast, which produces oil and gas. But really that 25% is a little bit more in Moscow because you've got the whole oblast. So if you add up everything, you could almost make an argument that 50% of the Russian economy centers around Moscow, which is fed by Tyumen and St. Petersburg. That's a large percentage. And all the rest of Russia, this vast Russia, that is the largest country in the world, we can say, is contributing each one like these small granulars of GDP, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. So when Kursk goes offline, Belgorod go offline, you could make a claim that doesn't have an economic impact. Well, my claim is it's a modest, even significant economic impact, and here is why. What do they produce in these two oblasts, particularly Kursk? They produce agricultural products. They grow wheat, cattle, sugar beets. And you can say, yeah. But think about human history. Between 80 and up to not more than 150 people migrated from Africa across to Asia and then Eurasia and then to Europe. And they settled in the Caucasus Mountains. From there, subsequently, Indo-Europeans spread out, but most of them were concentrated in the prehistorical cultures in Ukraine. Why? Because it's a breadbasket. I mean, you take a stick and you stick it in Ukraine and it will grow. It's got this rich black earth. Europe doesn't have that. And nowhere in the world does it have this thick basin for geographical reasons, if you know the geographical history, which is another story. And these two regions of Belgorod and Kursk are a little bit of an overflow or extension of the Ukrainian breadbasket black earth region. So the Indo-Europeans settled there, they lived there for a long time, and then they spread out and, did Europe. So Russia is mostly in growing zone, USDA like 4 or 5, pretty cold weather. They can't produce food. They have to rely on these regions. So even if you tally the total goods and services sold, which is the GDP, these regions are a small contribution. But if you put it in the context of what they're contributing, that is food, serving Moscow, and right now we have tight sanctions around Russia, this is a very significant impact. Because these are the breadbaskets, the growing regions of Russia. And already, because of the extreme weather in Europe, there have been huge impact on food prices. Russian inflation is skyrocketing, particularly food inflation. In the United States, in contrast, that has quelled. We even have some deflation. It's another story, another video. We have low interest rates going lower and low inflation. It's another video. I could talk about PCE, Fed targets. The reason we had inflation in the U.S. basically was a monetary pump during this critical time. And, 2001, you know why, 2002, 2003 a little bit. The reason why they have food inflation in Russia, shortages. They can't produce enough. Now that these two oblasts are offline, they're breadbasket, so to speak, of Russia, you're going to have a massive impact. Because if you know Maslow's hierarchy of need, people look for food and security first. Forget these higher order goods that they quote unquote go into the Moscow GDP. Hierarchy of needs, people need food. You don't have food production from the breadbasket of Russia, or at least you have inflation, and inflation is a tax on the poor, not a tax on the rich, because the rich can mitigate it with asset price inflation, where food inflation, it spreads across the poor. You're going to create some geopolitical friction. This is not probably the main objective of Ukraine, or it may be, we don't know, but it certainly is an economic shockwave or impact, taking these two critical breadbasket oblasts offline. And yes, I do know something about agriculture, as I've mentioned in my videos. That's what I do professionally. These are Cosmos flowers, by the way, if you want to know. The second impact is monetary. You're going to say, what is the currency of the world? Everybody's going to say, the U.S., euro. The currency, the monetary currency of the world is trust. If you've ever done business, if you've ever been in business, if you've ever bought something on a platform online, what do you look for when you're trying to disseminate, and discern who to buy for, what seller? You look for the trust rating, the trust factor, the trust stamp. And if you see large parts of the breadbasket of Russia, not all of Russia, a small little section of Russia, but a significant section in terms of food production, maybe there's something going on there that you shouldn't trust. And certainly that's reflected in the ruble going down about 10, 11, 12% in the last week. Something's happening there. If other countries can't trust, or you don't invest in a business which is not an ongoing entity, that can do arm's length transactions, that is an ongoing concern. Is Russia an ongoing entity? I don't know. I wouldn't buy a perpetual bond from the current Russia state. Perpetuals are bonds without maturity. I wouldn't buy a long-term bond from Russia. I wouldn't buy any bond or hold any currency for that matter. They have massive inflation, and it's caused by shortages. Raising interest rates, like I talked about, in Russia to 18%, it's not going to do the trick because it's caused by shortages. Decrease in productivity. Knut Wicksell, 1898 to 1926, talked about this. David Davidson, the Davidson-Wicksell polemic. You can't control inflation or deflation when it's connected to productivity. Monetary tricks don't work. So we've got a GDP, agricultural GDP issue impact, and we've got a monetary impact because it has a huge psychological impact on the currency of Russia, the currency of trust. Is it an ongoing entity? Is it an ongoing concern? Can you say with great definity, would you bet your house on the fact that Russia is in its current state will exist in 2027, or do you think there'll be regime change or something radical will happen? I wouldn't. These two factors interplay with each other. They're not necessarily always interdependent, but there's an interplay between the real and the monetary factor, and they create impacts on each other. So the net result is this will only add fuel to the fire of Russia burning, the economy going down and collapsing. A lot of you, I just started making this prediction a couple months ago, and if you look at my metrics, I put 10% in the summer, 20%, I believe, in the fall of 2024. So don't you guys chastise me and flame me for saying you're making these predictions all the time. I haven't. I just started in the summer and I put it at 10%, 20%, and then up each quarter it goes up another 10%, with the end game being at the end of 2026. But quite frankly, the way things are going, the Russian economy may collapse much earlier. Might be an early Christmas this year. So I just wanted to discuss that there's more to the story than just movement of men and machines in these two oblasts. The Ukrainians are very respectful. They don't steal things. They don't pillage and plunder as the Russians do. But still, just around harvest time in these colder growing zones, and it is just harvest or just past harvest. If you know anything about, wheat production, rye production, and crop production, it's around harvest now. It's interesting that these two oblasts, the breadbaskets, have gone offline. And it's great they have fancy coffee shops in Moscow still humming out. But what good is it if you don't have bread and potatoes? And you can't afford it, the average Russian. Let's watch and see. Ukraine doing an honest job. It hurts me. I want to see the world become a better place. And any type of this situation hurts me personally because I don't want to see people suffer. But they're doing an honest job defending what they have to defend. My name is Mark Bernard. I'm a monetary economist. And this has been about the economic impact of the Kursk Oblast and the Belgorod Oblast within the context of the geopolitical, geoeconomic situation. Thank you very much. Have a great day.